The Prime X has been one of my absolute favorite shoes ever. It's gigantic and chaotic, and I love it for fast, long runs. But with a complete redesign in the Prime X2 Strung, has Adidas made all the right changes to avoid a sophomore slump? It's time to lace up the Prime X2 Strung and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews shoes here on YouTube. And today, I'm gonna talk to you guys all about the Prime X2 Strung. Before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I purchased myself. No one sent it to me or is paying me to make this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Prime X2 Strung. And first, let's go over the specs. One thing that they haven't changed on this shoe is that it's still a 50mm rule-breaking shoe. Now that rule that we're breaking is a World Athletics rules that says you can't have a shoe that's over 40mm in height and can only have one carbon element in it, or like one layer of carbon element in it. But that's really a rule that only applies if you're the kind of runner that's elite enough that you have to submit your equipment before the race for inspection. If you're not subject to that equipment inspection, and if you're not trying to win prize money or set world records, the rule doesn't apply to you. Now, this is a shoe that is not stack height for stack height's sake, although there is quite a lot baked into this cake. We have 3 different layers of Light Strike Pro, or really there's kind of like 2.5 layers. So there's like a top layer and then a bottom layer. And then there's also 2 layers of carbon fiber plates in here. And what's interesting is you can actually see both of the carbon plates through this double cutout. So on the bottom of the shoe, you have a cutout window that shows you the first carbon plate, and then that carbon plate has a cutout in it so you could see the second carbon fiber plate in here. And that kind of half layer that I'm talking about is this little wedge that's toward the forefoot of the shoe, where in between the 2 carbon elements, there is a squishy layer of padding of foam. It's kind of like putting an airbag into a car suspension is the kind of best way that I can describe it. As you're squishing the shoe and those 2 layers of carbon fiber, you're also squishing that middle layer of foam too. And when all 3 of those things release or decompress, you're getting a lot of nice pop. Now, another change that they've made in this shoe is the drop. In other words, how much of a difference there is between the heel stack height and the forefoot stack height. In the Prime X Strung 2 this year, it's a 6.5mm drop. So that means that 50mm that you start out in the heel ends up being 43.5mm of stack height in the forefoot. Last year's it was, I think, 8.5mm. So there was less for you to land on in the front of the foot. On the outsole, we still have a bunch of Continental rubber, although the tread pattern is quite a bit different than what we saw in last year's Prime X and Prime X Strung. We also have a lot of changes as we move to the upper. We did see a strung version of the Prime X last year. The design of that strung material looks a little bit different. And this year, the 3 stripes seems to be sewn like in a different kind of way compared to last year. It kind of just looked like the 3 stripes were kind of just painted on. This year, it seems like they're woven into the upper itself. There's also a lot of changes that's happening in the tongue, and of the 3 different versions that exist of this shoe, the Prime X, the Prime X Strung, which is kind of like a 1.5 version, and the Prime X2 Strung, we've seen the most changes in this lacing system kind of area. Last year in the Prime X Strung, we had just a regular non-gusseted tongue. This year we have a sewn in knit material that makes it more of a strung knit booty. And you guys know I like the knit material, so I'm a big fan of this change. The change that I'm not a fan of though, is that they seem to have added these kind of like rubber grommets up at the top of the shoe on each side, right at the uppermost lace loops. And I'm guessing that that was so that people can really crank down on the laces and pull really hard. But this seemed to be less elegant of a solution. I never had a problem with any of the lacing in any of the prior versions of the Prime X that I've run in, and this just seemed like it allowed for the laces to kind of move around just a little bit more because they didn't seem to be as grippy as the regular other lace loops in the system. As far as the heel cup goes, we still have a very floppy, unstructured heel cup, which I love to see in shoes that I'm going to be using for racing or for running fast. But as we've gone through each iteration of the Prime X, there is just a tiny bit more padding added each time. It's almost not noticeable unless you look at the shoes next to each other, and we have the most padding we've ever seen as far as these little bumper pads go in order to help keep the ankle and heel locked into place. Overall, this shoe comes at a hefty weight of 10 ounces or 283 grams, which overall isn't terrible considering just how much shoe there is here. But keep in mind that last year's Prime X Strung came in at 9 ounces or 255 grams. All right, now that we've taken care of some of these paper specs, let's talk about what happens when you actually take it out on the roads. Overall, this is a very exciting update. I'm loving the Prime X2 Strung. It was an exciting shoe last year, and it's still a really exciting shoe for this year. But I think my more detailed impressions of the shoe come down to things that make the shoe more interesting and things that make the shoe a little bit more boring. First, let's go over the interesting stuff. They've changed the angle of attack for the rocker at the front of the shoe. It's a little bit more gradual, but it starts at a much earlier spot, so it feels like more aggressive of a shoe. And I feel like that is something that definitely helps with the turnover of their shoe when you're working with this much material. It's a slight change, at least visually. It's kind of hard to tell unless you're looking really close to it. But when you're standing in the shoes, you can feel it. And when you're running in the shoes, you can definitely feel it. I ran the Boston Marathon earlier this year in this Prime X Strung, and I felt like in those later miles, it felt really hard to kind of like get turned over on the shoe. I felt like I was just kind of stuck kind of midfoot and almost heel striking in those later miles as my legs were getting tired. And just felt like there was almost too much shoe up front and I couldn't get turned over. I just couldn't get around on it. That I think is going to go away with the redesign in the front of the Prime X2 Strung, because that rocker starts just a little bit earlier, and I feel like it's just that much more aggressive of a shoe, and I feel like it's a little bit easier to get onto the toes and pick that heel up as you're getting your legs turned over. And the other thing that I'm noticing with it, and I don't know if it's the combination of the rocker and the change in drop and the double carbon plates versus the kind of blade element systems they were using in last two versions, but I feel like this is a shoe where it's a little bit more sensitive to what you're doing. If you're running with good form, if you're running clean, up and tall and pretty, then I feel like the shoe really rewards it and you're feeling a nice positive feedback from the shoe. When you're starting to get a little bit sloppy, it's still a very forgiving shoe as far as carbon plated racers go, but it's not as exciting. You can kind of tell when you're running in a little bit more of a fatigue state. So it gives you a little bit more of a reminder to make sure that you're running as efficiently as possible. And that's something that I love to see in all my carbon plated racers and workout shoes. And I think the last thing that's more interesting about this shoe is that Light Strike Pro with the double carbon fiber plates just feels like it's a lot more easy to get faster than marathon effort. Last year's shoes, both the Prime X Strung and the Prime X, I felt like these are really great shoes for running around marathon effort, maybe even a little bit slower than marathon effort, just for like a long, steady run. But once you started to try to pick up the pace faster than that, I felt like kind of the heft of the shoe started to become a factor. I've taken this shoe out for a threshold workout as well as for marathon effort miles, and I felt like both efforts this shoe did a really fantastic job in. Now, the faster you go, the more that you're going to feel kind of the weight of the shoe, and it's going to start to feel a little bit clunky. But compared to last year, I feel like this is a shoe that you can definitely take for those faster threshold type of workouts. So that's the stuff that I think is more exciting about this shoe. It's just a better shoe for running faster. It's a better shoe for running longer. Now let's talk about some of the stuff that I don't quite like as much. I think one of the things that they've done here is that they've flared out the back part of the heel just a little bit compared to what the heel looked like in the version 1 of the Prime X. And I think that what that does is it makes it a little bit more stable and a little bit less chaotic of an experience if you're more of that midfoot and heel striker type of runner. It was a little bit kind of iffy, a little bit on the scary side in the Prime X Strung or the Prime X version 1, but that's part of the charm and part of the fun of running in a shoe that's this tall and has this much technology built into it. And so I feel like in the name of stability, they have kind of made the shoe a little bit more clunky. And the other thing that is less interesting about this update is one of the things that makes it more exciting is that double carbon fiber plate. Now, what it does is it gives you a really nice pop when you are working at marathon efforts or faster. But the other thing that it does is it really stabilizes the shoe very well, and it makes soft feeling foams feel a little bit less soft. So this year's shoe feels slightly more dense than last year's. Combine that with the flared heel and midfoot of the shoe, and it feels like a shoe that's not quite as dynamic. It's a shoe that doesn't move as much, at least when you're feeling it on foot with each foot strike. So that makes it feel more controlled. It makes it feel less scary, but also makes it feel less exciting. And I will say that the upper is not my favorite. The strung material looks fantastic. The design is striking and innovative, but I just don't like the changes to the lace loops that they have here. I thought the Prime X Strung version 1, I ran with that one in Boston in the rain and it did perfectly. I don't like this system. I feel like the laces slide around just a little bit more, and I especially don't like these grommets. The laces are moving around a lot in here, so I felt like the lacing system constantly felt like it was shifting around as I was running. I do like the knit tongue. I think it feels fantastic, and this is the first Prime X that's actually easy to get the shoe on. The other two versions, it was always kind of like put your foot in and then mess around with the tongue for a whole while before you could actually get the shoes laced up and running. This one is just a lot easier to get into. I just wish the lacing system wasn't so kind of sloppy. But with all that being said, I still feel like the Prime X2 Strung is a fantastic update. I'm very excited about it. I think it made it a better shoe, a shoe that more people could probably not only just work out in, but might want to start racing in as well. I had a fun time racing in the Prime X Strung version 1, and I'd feel even more confident running in the Prime X Strung version 2. Now let's talk about some of the pairing options if you want to use this in a rotation, like where does this fit with some other shoes? And then let's also do some comparisons with the competition and see how it fits in terms of a buying guide. Now, what I'm gonna do here is give you kind of like a big shoe rotation. So like if you like the big shoes and you want big stack heights, this is the rotation for you. If you're gonna be using the Prime X2 Strung as your workout shoe, then I feel like the marathon racing shoe that you should reach for is the Endorphin Elite. It's another really tall stack height shoe. It's 40 millimeters, so this is technically race legal, but it's super lightweight. It's using two high-end foams that Saucony now has in its arsenal, and the upper is featherweight and it breathes and sheds water exceptionally well. This I think would be very fun to race in if you've been doing all your workout miles in the Prime X Strung 2. Now we got racing and we got workouts covered. What about your easy days and recovery days? Let's go with the biggest stack height shoe that I can think of, the Fresh Foam More version 4. It is a huge stack height shoe, very comfortable, very squishy, but in a different way than what you're gonna get in the Endorphin Elite or in the Prime X Strung 2, but it's gonna be super comfortable and it has that tall stack height and early rocker feel that you're going to be accustomed to if you've been putting a lot of miles in the Prime X2 Strung. So that's kind of like my giant shoe rotation that I think could be really, really fun. Now let's talk about what this shoe costs. It's gonna retail for $300, and I think one of the shoes that you should definitely compare it to if you're thinking about buying this very expensive shoe is the first version of the Prime X, because that's still for sale. Unfortunately, you're not gonna get much of a discount if you're looking at the Prime X version 1, because both of these shoes are still available and they're both $300. Now, how would you choose, or why would you choose the original version? I think that if you're looking for a slightly lighter weight and you prefer having a later stage rocker where it gets aggressive in terms of the rocker, but not until way at the end, then I feel like there are some dynamics here that could have some people still preferring the version 1 over the version 2. I just wish that this shoe would be on sale now that there's a second version, so that way more people can get into the Prime X. Now, in terms of other shoes that are out there on the market that compete with the Prime X, I'd say there really aren't a lot, because the Prime X, it's almost a shoe in its own category. There's not a lot that is very similar to the Prime X, but one shoe that comes to mind comes from Asics, and that's the Super Blast. This is also a jumbo stack height shoe using a bunch of racing foam, just like the Prime X2 Strung does. But instead of a carbon fiber plate, it has a layer of daily training foam on the bottom to help kind of stabilize everything and make everything a little bit more manageable at a wider variety of paces other than kind of just race pace. Now, I raced CIM in this last year, and kind of like the Prime X, I loved this shoe for most of that race until the end, where I felt like I just wish I had a little bit more of that, just something to help give me a little bit more of an edge in those really fatigued states. That's where I feel like the Prime X2 Strung, with its a more aggressive stance and the double carbon fiber plate, could definitely be a contender against this Super Blast. Now, the other thing that the Super Blast has going for it is that it's featherweight compared to the Prime X2 Strung. So if the weight of that shoe is something that's concerning you, definitely take a look at the Super Blast. The Super Blast now comes in at $200, so you're saving $100. Now, the other shoe, and I think this is a little bit more of a stretch that I'm going to use to compare it to, is going to be from New Balance, and that's the SC Trainer version 2. Last year, the original version of this shoe came in at a very tall stack height, rivaling what the Prime X and what the Super Blast had. This year, they've brought it under that 40 millimeter number, but they're using 2 layers of their racing foam and a carbon fiber plate to give you an experience that is pretty similar to how I would use the Prime X2 Strung. Something that I would use for my long run workouts and even for some threshold mile repeats. I feel like this is also very comfortable, tall, fun shoe that you can run in. The Super Comp Trainer version 2 comes in at $180, so that's $120 cheaper than the Prime X2 Strung. So if you want the Prime X2 Strung, get the Prime X2 Strung. You just gotta know that you're gonna be paying for it because it's an expensive shoe. There's nothing else that's really like it, but there are other shoes that can do similar things and can be used similarly. I like having all of these shoes. I think that they're all super fun. But with all 3 of these shoes, we're getting into the ridiculous range of prices. So it's really hard to kind of measure them against each other in a dollars per performance kind of thing. If you want it, get it. If you don't. And those are my thoughts on the Prime X2 Strung. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream I do Monday through Friday over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?